I just have to say, like, this past week has been kind of a whirlwind, like a big whirlwind, but but I'm so grateful to be here today, being able we're entering Matthew. I had to really think about it, like, where are we going to start? And I think the good place to start is Matthew, because we were looking at the Jewish order of Scripture, except for the 12 minor prophets. We kind of danced around those, but like we basically went in the order of the Jewish Scriptures. And so I feel as if it's appropriate to go based on the general Christian ordering of the New Testament. And before I even do, there's a few things I do want to talk about. First of all, same thing as we did before. Like at the very first time we came together, I just feel as if it's appropriate to stay because we're entering the New Testament, and I never know like how many people are actually going to be listening in more on the New Testament versus what we did in the Old Testament. So like, because I noticed too that like when we entered Matthew, there were a couple extra people like when we were doing our Bible reading that people joined in on that. So it's like, okay, so I just want to clarify, this particular Bible study is a foundation shaker, and the reason I say that is because things. What we do as part of this Bible study is look at things the way that they were in their cultural context. Look at things, the reason why this Bible study is called The Bible Through the Eyes of the Scribes is because we are going to be we've already covered the Old Testament in terms of like looking at the unbelievable intricacy of the Hebrew Scriptures. And now what we're going to do as we turn into the New Testament is we are really going to be getting into like how things are tying in. And there are going to be some references that we've already done this like in previous sections, such as in the Old Testament. There are going to be statements that can potentially be seen as heretical in nature. I just asked that if anyone is listening to this and is apprehensive in terms of like not wanting their faith to be shaken, I do say and I do recommend that this is not the study for you. Like this is not going to be something that, like, for example, if you're not, like, God works with people in so many different ways. And this is something that has shaken my foundational beliefs, and I know has shaken others in this group that we typically attend. And I just want to reiterate: if you are at a point where you don't believe that you can actually like cope with like things that really shake your foundation, I recommend that you don't listen right now. That's my personal recommendation, and I think you know what I'm saying. However, if you do choose to listen, I do request an open mind. That is part of the disclaimer that goes online, both on the church website as well as YouTube. The disclaimer is this is something that will be foundation shaking, and so we are going to be looking at things from a new pair of eyes. And one last thing as well. In terms of history, Mom brought this up way back in the first one, that when we look at history or historical context, we have to make sure that we don't bring there are times we do in our discussion, but like we have to be careful of looking at things in a historical context through our own modern perceptions. The things that really do help, though, is understanding that human nature is very much alive, back then just as much as it is today. So human nature pretty much is stationary in that term, in those terms. However, when looking at historical things, we have to understand. For example, when we enter Matthew, we are in a different world because, first of all, we live in the United States. Everyone that attends this regularly, we live in the United States. Like, we are not under the oppressive regime that the Jewish people were under in terms of like the Romans like overseeing every detail of their lives. I'm not talking politics. I'm not talking about like the modern political sphere, because it's like honestly we don't have a comparison to when we are looking at things in the New Testament. There's a lot of things going on with this, and so we have to understand where they're coming from. I have never been oppressed. I've never been under a regime that, like, I don't care where I've lived, I've never experienced something like this. And so I think this is something that we have to understand, that they are coming from a particular perspective, as well as, but there are similarities between modern contexts and ancient contexts. So we do mention those. But I also want to say there are some certain theological perspectives that clash. That I'm not saying that like anyone's one particular way is like not like. What I'm saying is we are going to be talking about what the Scripture is saying. Theologians spend their entire lives looking at Scripture and coming up with various isms, I guess you could say, in a good sense. I'm not talking about in a bad sense. We are going to talk about bad isms later. But that's not what I'm talking about. However, we are going to be looking at the foundation for where these thoughts came from. And but we're predominantly going to be looking from the historical perspective. I believe that's enough of a disclaimer. I did want to spend a significant chunk of time just talking about this for anyone new who is arriving and doesn't know what type of material we will be covering. So yeah, does anyone have anything to say before we get started? Okay. Let's go ahead. I'm going to do this first of all. If you do not have a piece of paper with a pen, I do, Mom, don't worry. So if you don't, I would recommend taking just a moment of your time to get something ready. Tonight is going to be just like a splurting of a lot of facts. Okay, so it's going to be like I'm going to be like rampaging, and then what we're going to do is sit down and talk about them. I attempted this before, but the thing is though, there's a reason why I want to focus on a particular chunk today. And then if the discussion lasts until next week, that's fine. But I do want to get the significant chunk today because of the poetic nature that Matthew is written in. So I do want to look at things in chunks. Okay. So so if you don't have, I have a tablet. So go ahead.
I totally forgot.
There you go. I already have my notes written, so I'm just going to be waiting for the discussion time here. I'm going to wait another 30 seconds or so. Also, as you are getting these things ready, this is going to be a totally different approach than what we do with the Hebrew scriptures, particularly because I don't know Greek. But if we're more interlinear, no, we will. I'm sure we will. I'm sure. Maybe even tonight. I don't know. But I am familiar with facets of Greek grammar. I am not studying it at this current time. So I'm kind of going a little bit blind in terms of the language. However, if a question is raised, I will take the time and dedication in order to see how the grammar is working. Greek is an Indo-European language. English is a distant cousin. So there are a lot of similarities between Greek and English, and there's a whole lot of differences. But but I do, like, for example, we don't have the ablative. But anyway, but we will be looking somewhat in the interlinear. I have noticed that the way that my notes are today, it's more as if I'm giving a sermon. I hope I don't. I hope I don't enter that realm. I'm really just seeing where God takes this one. But there are certain facts, like actual facts of the point of what the scripture is saying that I do want to bring up. I'm going to list my sources as well. We got the Case for Christ. That one is a phenomenal source in terms of the historicity of the New Testament. There was also at Door of Hope in Portland, Oregon, a long 1.5-year series of sermons. I get a predominance of my information from this. However, I also have my own additions and subtractions from that. Like I had to look at how not to preach, but like how to get the certain information. And this information also gave me the ability to branch out and to look in other directions as well. I have, we're also going to be using a lot of the material from before. For example, things like that came from The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser, and several other references. Oh, studying Hebrew and the inferences from Hebrew that actually did transfer into Greek, stuff like that. So that's basically a lot of where this source material comes from. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what I mean by the information in the case for Christ. We're going to start by talking about how widespread the New Testament was by a certain point in history. So so we know about Homer's oral tradition, and this is like a really clear-cut example, right? Homer was a very famous oral poet. He was blind. He didn't physically write these poems. The tales that he gave, and the things that and the thing is though, I think it was like centuries after he died that things were actually written, and a lot of, and I'm not even talking about like the tales that he told, things like this, like a lot of things have the tendency of becoming legends. Like so, if you have like a certain historical event, a couple centuries later, you got a lot of legends that come from that. The Bible is unique. First of all, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey only had a certain number of like copies available, like in terms of manuscripts, and like the New Testament exploded that number. It's like a clear cut, like 25 to 50 times more prevalent, or more copies. That it was so prevalent. I might be wrong in my figures, but it exploded. What I mean is, like, you got like the amount of like copies of like the amount of copies of the New Testament. It's a lot, or the different letters, or the four gospel books, all that stuff. We're not going to get yet into the ordering of the New Testament and why certain things were excluded, such as Thomas or Mary or all those things. There are historical reasons for this. We're not going to talk about them today. Definitely later, though. We talked about Enoch and Maccabees and all that stuff. And what was the other one? We touched on Jubilees. Jubilees? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we will touch on those, but not today. But I do want to say that, like, when it comes to the reliability of the books of the New Testament, it's super reliable. I think it's like you had the first copies being made like 30 years after the fact, and that's crazy. And the people that lived during Jesus' time were writing like just a few decades later. They themselves were having these things written. These things were copied. It's like inconceivable to have so many copies of something happen from a first-person perspective. Crazy. It's really crazy. That never happened with like other big forms of literature that we know. For more information on that, I do recommend reading The Case for Christ. It is really well done in terms of like the detail provided. And it actually did a lot to improve my own belief in what these words were saying. So I do recommend that. So, like, if you ever want to just go ahead and look it up, it's a good read. It only lasts a few hours if you were to get the audio version. So, 15 hours long? I forget it. Forget it. Anyway, like, I remember there was a period of like a year and a half ago when a friend of mine, a Christian friend of mine, like gave me like 10 books at once, and I didn't have time to sit down and read them, so I just had the audio going, and I would do it like when I go to the gym and stuff like that. So it's like they went quickly. So some of the stuff gets mixed together in terms of that. Okay, so that's enough of that. Matthew. Matthew is a very beautifully done book of the gospel. It's very poetic. We were talking about numbers before in Gematria in terms of what Hebrew does. Let's just start right off. You got 4 sections of Matthew, 4 of them. And later on, when the chapters were added, they were 4 sections of 7 chapters. And so today we have 28. So you got 7, 14, 21, and 28. There's a little bit of variance. They're not clear-cut because chapters weren't added until later. We had this discussion when we were talking about the Old Testament, how the Old Testament was more reliable in terms of verse numbers, but with Matthew, it is 4 distinct sections. Now, it's so poetic how things happen. So we will be talking about this. Now, we also are going to be talking about like certain sections of the Old Testament in terms of prophecy. We did mention before how a lot of the things that a lot of Christians think about prophecy, when you look at the actual statement, it could have been taken a lot of different ways. So some of them were clear-cut, others not so much. And we will be looking at that in Matthew today. Now, how it's going to roll is, like I said, I'm going to do a blow-by-blow, and I'm going to stop for just a moment just to catch a breath, and then we're going to do a blow-by-blow. I want to get done with the Sermon on the Mount today. And there's a reason for that. And I'm sure I will. I'm pretty sure I will if I just do a blow-by-blow. During this time, I would recommend that you write down any issues or comments or stuff like that, and we can have a whole discussion going later. But I think it'll be interesting to try it this way. First of all, it's the New Testament. Second of all, it's something we haven't done before, so it'll be interesting to, or not done successfully.
We did once in the Old Testament.
We did once, and it was like, I can't do this. I gotta stop. But here I feel as if it's more appropriate. It really is a lot more appropriate, and I hope it flows. So, all right, we'll go ahead and start. Now, we know about like how Matthew 1 is one of the 2 genealogies presented. Very interesting, the numbering of these genealogies. It's quite clear. Like when you are looking at verse 17, where it says, all those listed above include 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah. So sometimes this, we got 42. Oh, 42. That is a very interesting term that we have come across a lot of times. And so we got 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, but grouped into 3 groups of 14 so we got 3 groups of 14, or 6 times 7, and we have 42 in total. Do you remember what the gematria of David was? 14. So David, for anyone new, David's numerical value in terms of the Hebrew Scriptures equated to 14, and his small gematria was 5. And if you're looking at, isn't that interesting that we have, I just thought that there was a 5 in there somewhere. I don't know what it was, but that's okay. Anyway, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the genealogy. You got 3 women that are mentioned. First of all, in Rome, you had, or any culture really, you had a lot of value put on kings and their fantastical origin. And we talked about this at length during the Old Testament. It's no different. Like, really, things didn't change all that much by the time the Romans came along. Caesar's a prime example, talking about all the different things that led Caesar to become deified. And so it's interesting that, and you could worship Caesar back in those times. He was a figure to worship in temples. So, and he had fantastical elements to his origins. And here we got Jesus, right? The king. Got 3 women that are mentioned of questionable origin. One of them is a prostitute, or acted as a prostitute. One of them was, we got 2. Wait, no, was Tamar mentioned? Hold on. Tamar. Tamar's mentioned. You got Rahab. She was a prostitute. Tamar acted as a prostitute. Then you had Ruth, She was the daughter of an incestuous relationship. Then you have, no, by daughter I mean like several generations. Like, anyway, Moab came from, as a result, from Lot's daughters having children through him. So then we have...
There's a reference to Bathsheba.
Yeah, and Bathsheba, exactly. And so you got, and you have Bathsheba, who produced Solomon, and she was a bit conniving in her means, and so was David. And so, like, very, very because like he killed someone in order to have Bathsheba, and Bathsheba kind of like twisted things around to get Solomon into power. So I think it's clear that you have a very sharp contrast in terms of like the historical context as well as the way that this book is written. Don't tell me it's not intentional. And it's only 4 women that are mentioned. And not to mention all 4 women had questionable backgrounds. Interesting. Now, before we get any further, but I'll say this about the generation. The beginning of John, the Gospel of John, as well as the generations of Matthew and Luke, and partially Mark as well, they are redeclarations of the creation story. And so this is the genealogy leading to the new Adam. And Jesus is seen as Adam, a new Adam. This comes across later in different texts. And remember, like all these characters you just talked about had questionable origins. Adam, like himself, had all these different things going on, but Jesus was a man. Adam means man, humanity, and Eve meant life. So So the word Adam meant man or humanity. Eve meant life or living, and it was also derived from a word for side, but that's something from way back when. So this is kind of like a restatement of like things are going to start new now. We have the genealogy of how things led through. Also, I'm just restating this genealogy does not seem kingly. It makes Jesus a lot more approachable than if he had a really fantastical background in terms of that. Jesus is just seen as any other Joe Schmo. Like, yeah, had an interesting genealogy, but you're looking at the character traits of some of those people in that list, men as well. It is interesting. So, all right, another thing. Before we get any further, I forgot to mention this. You have to understand one thing about the gospel. One thing huge, gigantic, huge point. It's not always talking to you. The Gospels, the epistles, and actually basically Revelation's an epistle in and of itself. But anyway, they're not always talking to you. They are at points, but it's usually in a collective sense. Sometimes she just comes right up in your face. Discernment is crucial when it comes to knowing when it truly is talking to you. Not always. So it's not recommended to read certain sections and think, oh, this is a direct statement to me. There are times we will talk about that. But this is more a declaration of Christ is our King. This is how. This is what the good news, the gospel, in case you don't know, gospel is good news. That's the meaning of it. Now, I am going to pose a question. Does anyone know, I'm sure you do, and everyone in this group, what is the gospel? What is it? What is the message of the good news? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. For something to be at hand, it means it is right there, in your grasp, ready to be used. It is here. Like, meaning it is at this moment in your possession, in your hand. So that is that's the meaning of like the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is already arrived. Is the essence, right? Because when Christ is around, like he is the embodiment of that. Later on, Christians start to create the kingdom in terms of fuel the kingdom, I guess you could say. All right, so that's enough with that introductory stuff. One last thing is about, remember when God said to Abraham when he made the covenant with him, the first covenant God made it with Abraham. He spliced an animal, and God himself walked through it. Abraham did not. And God said, I am making this promise to you. And through that covenant, and that's why the genealogy starts when it says 14, from Abraham to David, from David to the exile, from the exile to... so the reason it starts with Abraham has to do with God fulfilling his covenant promise. And it is through Abraham that all peoples are blessed. And so that's a key point there. Now, in terms of God being with us, in this sense, Christ is being born. He is a human. He is. Do not, very strongly, do not misappropriate his divinity. Like, what I mean is, like, we say, now I am making a modern statement, we say as Christians that Christ was man and divine. True. But the traditions that we have today predominantly, and I mean like over 90%, focus more on his divine characteristics. Do not misappropriate that divinity. It's 50-50. It's not even 50, it's like 50-50 meshed together. It's like, what I'm saying is, he was, it is like risen, a man, a human, an Adam. But he was himself made humble. Like, he was God himself made humble in the form of a human. Like, and I'm not saying he just had the shell of a human. He was a human. Like, that is crucial to remember. Like, you have to remember this. Because and I say this because his divinity is always emphasized in terms of church. And it's like, but and there's a reason I say that, because we as Christians are called to be just like him. And that's the whole point there. All right, now, so we got the thing about Jesus of Nazareth. He was born, Bethlehem. Bethlehem in Hebrew means house of bread. I just think it's interesting that the Magi were a monotheistic priestly elite, very similar to Levites. They are also potentially part of the remnant, but that's debatable. They're very mystic in nature, and they looked for signs in the sky. What happened in Genesis 1? God created the heavenly bodies for the seasons and signs. And there's another thing too, I forget. But signs. We were talking about the concept of astrology and how God does use the cultures of other people to do his purposes. There's a time when he said, through my servant Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was not like an Israelite, right? But the thing is, though, God called Nebuchadnezzar his servant. So it's like, you got to understand that the Magi were, in essence, a representative of the nations. They followed a star. There was a sign in a star. So they actually, so interesting. They followed a star. They arrived. They saw Herod, and they said, so where's the real king, basically? Imagine doing that with a president of the United States saying, so you've been elected. Yeah, cool. Where's the real president? And so it's really, not to mention their caravan disrupted Jerusalem. Yeah, you can read that in the text. It's like their caravan was so huge that all of Jerusalem was in a stir, not 3 people. And so, like, you, I can only imagine like people from, like, I don't know, like a huge caravan of people that arrived overseas from, I don't know, anywhere, just huge, came to Washington, D.C., was like, so where's the real president? We have a question to ask. We want to see the real king. So, big deal. Now, another thing, too. Remember that they consulted the scribes. And interesting, the scribes knew very well where the Messiah would be born, because they were also searching for signs. And so they knew things. And interesting that he was right in their vicinity, but they never went looking. But the Magi did. The people that were not Israelites went to look for Christ. That's a huge point. Huge. Now, all right. Not to mention the Magi, like they said, like, come back and talk to me. And like, okay. And then later they're like, that would have been a huge disgrace as well. And Herod, in terms of human terms, Herod was rightfully angry, and so he was rightfully angry. But it's interesting. There's a lot of divine purpose that comes through here, because it's like I just read something on the Bible Project about if you had like a CNN conference on like why it was that Judah fell, it was because of a breaking of a treaty. But yet you had the prophets saying, no, this is all God's divine intervention. So it's stuff like that. So this is what we're approaching here as well in terms of Matthew. Herod was, in terms of humanness, very angry, and rightfully so. So, like, similar to Saul being angry. The whole thing about David being the next king, but like Saul actually legitimately was still king during certain points of the story. Don't forget that. Now, the story of Joseph and Mary fleeing and all that stuff, and going back and giving birth in a manger, all that stuff, far from a sign of religious fulfillment. If they followed the Lord, they served the Lord, their lives were not great, like in terms of how we would see it. But Christ was born in a manger. You had a king born in deplorable circumstances. So yet again, we're coming across a clashing of things. One thing you have to remember about the kingdom, I love how the Bible Project puts it, you have to view it as an upside-down representation of everything that we think we know. And that's why we're going to be getting into some foundation-shaking stuff when it comes to that. All right. They came out of Egypt. Got Herod. He's seen as the villain in this story, not Egypt. Out of Egypt I've called my son is a reference to what happened with Israel, right? That's not a direct reference to what would happen with Christ. It's not. But similar to what happened in Zechariah, it was kind of like a preview of things to come. Same thing with the wilderness, like when Christ was 40 days in the wilderness instead of 40 years, and being tested. So out of Egypt, God called a son. And so you have to remember, it's not Nostradamus here. We're not talking about like Nostradamus like prophecies, because like I said before in our previous times together, when you look at the way that prophecy was written, it could clearly mean something else. And so here, when you have these prophecies being brought up, they're not clear-cut prophecies, a lot of them. And so, but the symbolism is huge. Similar, just like with Zechariah, it's a preview of things to come, right? Zechariah was directly stated. Other places like in Isaiah, not so much. We looked at Isaiah 53 and said, is this truly, it's prophetic in nature because prophetic means seeing things through God's eyes. But prophetic in terms of like predicting the future. So anyway, but yeah, it's interesting that Herod, the king, the tetrarch of Judea, which was a province of Rome, the tetrarch of Judea, the figurehead of kingliness in what was Judah, is the enemy, and you have Egypt as a safe harbor. Very interesting statement there. Anyway, Nazareth. The word, yes, Nazar is a way of saying, or not, I forget it, but anyway, I butchered the pronunciation because I really didn't look at it, but I heard it before. Means something having to do like with like an offshoot, like either by a branch or a stick, like a stick that has broken off from the branch. Like so he grew up in a place that had to do with a thing called shoots, and not to mention the place was known for being rather dry. And it's funny, we're talking about the concept of dryness, and then you had in Isaiah that a shoot springs up from dry earth, and that it's very interesting. Like I was like all that stuff, and it's like new life is seen in dryness. It's so cool to me to think of stuff like that. But anyway, because there's a lot of thoughts, walks in the park and cups of tea. So let's go. And not to mention he's a shoot at this point, grows into a tree. Later on we're talking about grafting imagery onto that tree. So amazing. Anyway. Alright. That's kind of like a summary. Alright. Chapter 3. John the Baptist. Now, the church is not the kingdom. It's a witness to the kingdom's existence. Now, another thing I want to clarify is we talked about sin before, and I heard this in that sermon series, and I thought it was so good, and it so causes a lot of thought and walks in the park. Anyway, sin isn't how bad you are, but how on the mark you are not. And so it's like it's not talking about your evil. It's talking about how you don't quite get to that on point state. And God's glory, his glory, we talked about meant heaviness and his grandeur. You would think when you're talking about the gods of other nations, it's usually how other they are. And like how other and divine, that's something that has definitely pervaded Christianity. But it's not that though. Our God, his glory, comes from his identification with us. That's why Emmanuel means so much. And so his identification with us is the essence of his glory. And we are the ones that create otherness with him. So think about that for a second. He wants us to be with him. Back in the garden, when the fruit was taken, it was taken and then the otherness began. We choose to be other. And God's like, no, be with me. I identify with you. And Christ's story is a true identification as a human. Please, I am begging for anyone listening to this. Do not make a distance between you and God by thinking of him as so other that he cannot be approached. That is so pervasive in modern theology, it scares me. But that's I just want to say that out there. All right, cool. Yeah, and I also wrote this too. Jesus shows us the way to join him. It's a restatement of the same thing. Jesus shows us the way to join him by repenting, shuving, going 180, or upside down, or any way you say it, like by repenting from our self-made otherness. And so he makes us in his own image, but we choose to go another route. And Jesus is here saying, come this way. Come back to where you were originally meant to be. That's very much what's being stated. And talking about Jesus here, all right. Oh, big point that he's getting baptized in the Jordan. Wait a minute. Egypt, Jordan, wilderness, very, very close in this story, aren't they? So it's very, very interesting. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that can be said about what John the Baptist says. I'm just trying to see if there's anything I really want to mention here. Oh yeah. When he keeps saying that, like, God can create children of Abraham from these stones, that is a very interesting statement. Because isn't it interesting that just a little bit later there are stones that are being talked about as potentially being made into bread? Anyway, so there's like a lot of like parallel images talking about trees, but yet there's a branch that's coming out of the dry ground. And then John the Baptist is talking about anything that doesn't produce good fruit will be chopped down and thrown into the fire. We were talking about the fire before, and all its implications. So like everything is really coalescing at this moment. And don't just say to each other, we're safe. Don't rely on genealogies. But there was just a genealogy. And with genealogies, though, they talked about like how great they're. That's what Paul talks about later. Don't rely on genealogies. Like, don't rely on them as like we're fine. Like I got the authority from these genealogies because Jesus has authority from not so reputable individuals. So I think the point is being made. So all right. So, oh yeah, but by the way, in at the end of verse 12, I have, then he will clean up the threshing area, gathering the wheat into his barn, but burning the chaff with never-ending fire. Who is the Alpha and the Omega? So, anyway, and how is the Alpha and the Omega represented?
Wait a minute. Why'd you bring up Alpha and Omega? I missed that.
Then he will clean up the threshing area, gathering the wheat into his barn, but burning the chaff with never-ending fire. Okay. And God's equated to fire. And who is never-ending? God himself. And he's burning the chaff with his never-ending fiery presence. I'm saying this particularly because this is often equated to hell language. And like, we've done a lot of extensive stuff in talking about the purpose of fire in the previous section. So anyway, when the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus, this is interesting. It's similar in scope to the Spirit descending into the temple, and it lights itself within him. And so it's the whole beginning of the, because remember, he's the first of us, and he's the head of the church, as well as the husband. Don't get me wrong, but like God's presence, like he is God, and his presence was filled with God's presence. And, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like just like he truly is the image of God here. Anyway, so then you got chapter 4, the temptation. All right, let's stop for a second. Talk about testing. We talked about why God tests people before, and there's a couple points I wanted to make. Thank you, sermon series, for that one. Tests reveal our true nature. When we are faced with a test, what we choose shows how we really feel. The spirit, the spirit that is tempting him, the accuser, it's so you have the tempter. Came to him and said, "If you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." Okay, so you got the whole story there. Then he took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, and said, "If you are the Son of God, jump off." And look at what is said here. For the scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. The tempter uses scripture against Christ. Huge point. Like, huge. There is a belief that if it's written in scripture, then it has the weight of God, right? It has to be very, very careful with that, because even the tempter uses it. And it is also used in other places as well. And Christ himself fights people who use scripture against him. People as well. Even though, you know what I mean, the words in between flesh and blood, but what I'm saying is his arguments, his defenses, his all that stuff, very much is often in the face of humans as well. And then you also have, and then it was just like, well, then I'll give this all to you. Notice that the temptation usually has to do with, if you do this, then you will truly be God. Very similar to, did God really say? Did God really say this? Because he knows that if you were to eat of this, that you would become like him. And very similar stuff is happening in here. And it's interesting that it's 3. So, anyway. Then, after he, from this point forward in Matthew, spirit beings have an aura of defeat from this point forward. Always. And it's like, when he doesn't listen to the things that have been pulling the strings for so long, they're defeated. And this is really interesting to look at scripture that way. Anyway. Now, this is the beginning of the separation from the nation. Like, Israel was always meant to be separate. And Jesus' way forward truly makes this separate. It's like the fulfillment. That's what Christ talks about, like, I am here to fulfill the law. And so nations subdue through subjugation. Christ subdues, like rule and subdue the earth. The nations subdue through subjugation. They're in Rome. They're subjugated. Forced to obey. But the difference here is that Christ is declaring a new kingdom through peace and suffering and servitude. So it's like, that is not what an earthly king does. And this is I'm going to be showing a ton of like differences between human way and Jesus' way, the kingdom's way, all the way up to the point of the crucifixion. Anyway, so Okay. The good news is that the kingdom is here. I already talked about this. The good news is now we can live it. Like, now we really can attain, like, we can, through him. I'm not saying that it's by my own merit. Like, but I am saying it's like, it's right here. Just gonna take it. Now, here we go. His ministry begins. For the next 3 chapters, we have this thing very commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. It might be kind of a good take a break, I don't know. But let me tell you this. Time to get uncomfortable. This is a place where Christ really gets in your face. He really does this to shake you and say, are you ready to come with me? We should always have a point of being uncomfortable here, always self-evaluating. No, I'm not always state that. I believe that it'll get that for everybody it gets to a point where there's more right done than not. Like, in terms of like you're on the path longer than until the next time you make a mistake type of a deal. It's a training process. But for anyone new to this, or anyone looking at this with a new pair of eyes, he gets in your face. He still gets in my face. And I still have to think about this. And it's like, ugh. And there's a part of me that goes, ugh, when I hear it, but then I have to think to myself, is it because I'm so much a part of what has made this earth so sick to begin with that I feel that way? So to look at things with this is the path, walk in it type of a way of looking at this. Now, let's see what I can do. A little bit more before the break. We'll do that. Got to notice a couple of things here. Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7, are his words. From 8 are his actions of him putting it to practice. So, huge point, gigantic. I'm like saying like huge, huge, huge in all caps in my notes here. The Sermon on the Mount is not always speaking to you directly. I did say that he's in your face later on. It starts and then it kind of goes more into the individual nature of things, kind of. But the Sermon on the Mount is not always a direct command. Okay, we'll get into this in a second. So, context is crucial. Blessings, when we're getting into like the Beatitudes and stuff like that, remember when there are kings of a nation and they talk about the blessings that people have among people, among society, even among today, the blessings are seen when you look, for example, when you look at someone who has a nice car, nice house, nice family, like all these all the things that society wants, right? People look at them and say they're blessed. Blessed to be people who are like that. In Roman society, it was like blessings are gods favor those who earn their recognition. Gods pay attention when people are important. They are blessed when they are seen as rather important, heroic. The non-inferior are blessed. Christ, when he makes this sermon, is talking to the poorest, the most desperate, those who are hurting, like really severely hurting. He is talking to a multitude of people who are at their wits' end. They are subjugated. They are we cannot conceive that. I try, I fail, I cannot conceive the subjugation that they encountered. He is absolutely addressing people who have what they feel is no real hope, right? And he says, you're the ones who are blessed, not those who are important, not those who are not those who are seen as important, not those who gather riches and have these great things and say these great words and become your rulers. You are the ones to whom the kingdom of heaven is the most accessible. I have encountered times where these are seen as commands. I strongly disagree with that. Do I believe there's room for consideration there? Yeah, maybe. But he's not saying, I want you to mourn. I want you to be brokenhearted. I want you. He never says that. The particular reason I say that is when his actions come into play in chapter 8, his whole purpose is to make people joyous. His whole purpose is to say, it's okay. Like, now you can be free. This is the, I strongly believe that it is an error to look at the Beatitudes and say, mourn for me, be sad for me. Like, to me, that's masochistic in nature. And I cannot see God as being masochistic. I cannot see a relationship with God as being masochistic or sadistic. I can't imagine a parent looking at a child and say, mourn, go ahead, mourn for me. And that's, I can't. Now, there are sections of the Beatitudes where it's like, yeah, if you show mercy into others, think about like general society as well. In that time, it was cutthroat. Roman society was very cutthroat. And so no mercy was shown, right? And then Christ said, no, you're merciful. Like you're blessed. If you thirst for justice, you'll be satisfied. Meaning it's like what the Romans were doing, that was called justice. And what Christ was saying was, no, if you search for true justice, you will be satisfied. He is not saying to be militaristic at all. Like, that is a huge point there. Anyway, but we'll back away from that one for a moment. The biggest one for this is one I've often seen happen. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. He is not saying to go out and search for persecution. However, if we dedicate everything to Christ, it'll happen no matter what. It will happen. But it's not that we should be looking for every opportunity to be persecuted. Does it mean that we shouldn't stand for what's right? Does it mean that, but I am saying that, like, yeah, I will show it. There is a meme that is online that is an amazing example of this. Now, I do believe that you see everything I see but mirrored in a good way, because the way that my screen says it, the word Joel is written backwards on my screen, but I believe it is straight. So what I'm going to do is show this picture. Like here it says, like with this, and I'm going to read it. So, I don't like your kind. Know why? Oh, I'm reading it the right way. Yeah, know why? Oh, just a little book called the Bible. And then saying like, you're evil, God hates you, I hate you, you don't deserve rights. And then the person whacks the other person. That person goes, stop that, and says, oh, I'm being oppressed. I'm a victim of oppression. That, to me, is not God. And that, to me, is very much like how the Zealots believed. No, not even that. kind of. But we have to think of historical context, though. Do not, I am imploring everyone who ever listens to this, do not think that God is saying, go get persecuted. But he does say, you will be. Are you able to drink this cup? Essentially. Because that's what happens with James. Anyway, so yeah, he directly states that to James and John, but he basically says that you're going to face turmoil, everyone. Because one thing you have to understand is when it comes to the kingdom is so opposite, it will clash with the world. It unbearably does. And inevitably, thank you, unbearably, wow. Inevitably clashes. We shouldn't search for it. We shouldn't put ourselves in a position where we go looking for it. And we always have to be self-evaluating that. And it's something I have to personally be aware of. Please don't read the Beatitudes as orders. There are many sections of the Beatitudes where being a Christian will lead you to a point of being merciful, compassionate, the attributes of God, the overflowing with love, all that stuff. That is, we are called to be the statement in Exodus where he is compassionate and merciful, slow to anger. We are called to be just like that. Yeah. Now, does God mourn at times? Yes. Do we mourn at times? Yes. We're not ordered to. And anyway. So. Yeah, because even look at here. Like in verse 11, it says, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things about you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. That seems like a dichotomy there. Anyway, be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. Remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. And usually, universally, the prophets were the fewest in number. That is a very pertinent statement. They were the fewest. They were the outcasts. I strongly believe that the grand majority of the American church, if Christianity takes hold, like if Christianity actually were evident or existing within with any general congregation, they are few in number. And I mean that by not saying that we're the only ones that are that type of a deal, because we should be universalist in nature, meaning we should always hope that God will absolutely bend over backwards like he already has in order to save everyone. We should be universalist in nature. That doesn't mean that there won't be a final judgment. Please understand what I'm saying. But we should always hope because he is our hope, and that's the whole thing. So when we're persecuted, it's just they don't know what they're doing type of mentality. Just live and be, and that's what Christ is telling us to do. Anyway, salt of the earth. We aren't to try to be the salt of the earth. We already are. And so we have to understand that it's like he doesn't say be, he's like you are. And so when we follow him, we don't look toward victory. We look from it. And so that's why that's a huge point. It's like, oh, I hope that things will go according. No. That hope is not the hope that we should have, because we are already victorious. The point is, our hope lies in that there's something that, even though everything looks crazy around us, our hope is in him. Because we know, from just all the things that happen to us, and through us, and with us. And you get what I'm saying. we are already victorious. And anyway, it's a huge thing there. And our effect is like salt. Salt preserves and seasons. That means we're all under the same kingdom, no matter the culture. So we are preserved. We are a remnant in a sense. We're also renewed through how much we change. So we are fresh. And when Christians walk among others, always there are these comments like, you're just not like anyone. Or you're just different. And like, I just had this happen in my own life, like 3 times in like 2 days. It's like, and it's like, and I'm sitting here going, if anyone, when I was living, like when I was severely living in sin, I remember thinking to myself, no one would ever accept me, like if they really knew the true me or the things I have done. And here I am, having been proved the opposite because of him. And and it's funny because it's like, and that no one would accept me and everyone would abandon me. It's like people are drawn to me today. It's crazy. Like this week I've had so many. Oh, it's so crazy. But that's the thing. It's like that we are renewed by how much we change. But the thing is, so this statement here. Can we honestly say to ourselves that when people see us, they see Jesus? Because we are as bright, we are as the light, right? We are as bright as his reflection in us. And our light serves as a beacon. So just like he serves as a beacon, and he serves as our beacon. And so it's like mirrors, right? it's like you got a mirror that shines, and it's the same. But anyway, it is a retraining process. So the whole thing with the Sermon on the Mount, it is a retraining process. But in a sense, we still live in the world. So we are bound to clash, like I said before. Almost everything that he mentions not to do come from the concept of dehumanizing others. For example, killing. You don't see that person as worthy of being a human. If you call someone stupid, that means that they are not worthy of being on your equal playing field in terms of intelligence. Like if you do something to someone that hurts them, that means they're not worthy of the respect that you would give someone above you. Like so, the whole purpose is leveling the playing field and seeing everyone as equal. And that's that's talking about the mountains will be made low. That's the purpose of things going on here. Forgiveness, for example, is extremely unnatural. Animals don't forgive. They just really don't. Like, they might get over something, but, like, if there's something in the moment, they will bash heads, or like, they get their revenge, right? And so there's nothing normal about forgiveness. So there's nothing normal about us following Christ. So that's why we should never, ever, and I say my notes, ever in caps, and then ever with a space in between every letter. We should never force the issue or guilt trip people who are not Christians. Because it is not normal to be a Christian. It's not normal. So if we are already different, that place it was different in a good way, right? So why would I ever force someone? Christ never forced me. Like he came to with love and compassion, and then turned me, and that's the whole purpose of everything. So that is why, for us, it is never on us to force the issue. It's more on Christ to turn our hearts. And that's what he does with the Sermon on the Mount. That's when he gets in our face, right? God cannot wait anymore for prostitutes and tax collectors to make their offerings at the temple. So instead, he preemptively forgives them. He preemptively comes and finishes it. It's over. And because he's had enough. We talked about God's love before. And right now, he is bursting with love. He's had enough. It's over. And so we are to recognize that. And the law served its purpose. The law is like, I really liked one of these examples I heard. The law is like learning a language in its rules, its grammatical rules. You have to learn it. You have to memorize things. But over time, things get smoother. And then eventually, when you get to the point where you can be fluent, like when you can actually start to really use it with no problem, you don't sit there and labor over conjugations of verbs and stuff like that. You just speak them. You write them. You understand them. Doesn't mean that the memorization didn't serve its purpose. It just meant that it just means that you're not at that point anymore, and now it's just your way of life, and that's the way you operate. Very similar in terms of the law. So anyway, the law of the Torah, the way of living that is presented in the Torah, bound it. It bound it. It contained sin. And what Christ came to do was obliterate it. Like, in a sense that Christ himself, okay, an example is marriage. So you know that there's like the whole divorce thing that he gets asked about later, right? That was not the original intention. Christ himself said that it was made as a compromise. And so God hates divorce, but he allowed it, right? So understand that like the Torah itself, the legal code then was meant as a way to contain a sinful nature. Christ comes and said, I fulfill it. Like, I have contained it. Like, there is no longer are we to bind ourselves to sin, because now the accuser has been displaced, and now I am at the right hand. It's a huge point. But anyway. And what is sin that leads to death? That's an interesting statement, and we'll get to that later, like in the epistles, like with John. Sin that leads to death is the utter refusal of God's forgiveness. When you refuse to accept God in terms of his forgiveness for you, truly and honestly, like if you are bound by guilt and you refuse to see that God has already forgiven you, like no, I can't possibly have been forgiven for this. That's sin that leads to death. In terms, now I'm talking about when you already have a relationship with God, but when I think you understand what I'm saying. It's more than just someone who's a non-Christian, right? The sin that leads to death is when you know very well who he is, and you just cannot see yourself with him. In terms of like making him die again for you, in that sense. So it's a big point. When you utterly refuse his forgiveness. Talking about oaths, stuff like that. Like, at least I didn't swear on the gold of the... the whole oath thing is that we should always be representative of how we truly feel. That's why he said, may your yeses be yes, and your noes be noes. That's it. If you say, I swear by this, then it means that there are other times when you conceal yourself. Always be ready. Always be you. That's what he's saying. Like when you fail, like a lot of people say, oh, thank goodness I didn't swear to it. And it's like, it gives you an out. And that's evil. When there's always that out. An example, we're hypocrites. All of us are hypocrites. That's an out. Like, and that's something God sees as evil, because Christ calls us not to be. So that's a huge point, because I hear that all the time in churches. I don't care what church it is. We're all hypocrites. I always hear that. We are to be pure. When Christ says to be perfect, it's not really a command. It's more like you have no choice but to be. it's like, from what I understand about the word now, I might be wrong about the Greek, but it's like, it's done in a sense that means like, so why you live this way? Be perfect. You are perfected. Like that, like you are able to, the kingdom of heaven is right here. Take it. Take it. Be perfect. Accept the perfection. And it's like and I don't mean that like we don't fall short, because I don't want to say that as an out, that I said that God sees as evil. It's like we will make mistakes. Never dwell on them. That's why he says, don't let the sun go down, and that's not even with a mistake, because we're naturally angry. But you got the thing is like, if you have an issue with your brother, go take care of it. End it. Be perfect. Like be perfect again. Like, get back on that trail. Keep heading forward. You will slip. I'm right there to pick you back up. But keep marching forward. And I've personally been feeling like a lot of that, especially Protestantism. I'm not saying anything in any direct correlation to anything, especially Protestantism. I talked about this before, how there's like this one Catholic priest that was talking to Josh White and saying, like, it's funny that like a lot of statements are being made toward Catholics about like how we have to do our confessions and stuff like that, but I feel as if that guilt more pervades the Protestant version of Christianity, and I have to agree. I feel as if there's an ever present presence of guilt, and I am talking about everyone. It's like talking about like you're not worthy enough. You like all that stuff. I have heard it so many places, and it's just a prevalent nature of Protestant Christianity. I'm trying to think of where I didn't feel that. Oh, I thought of one. Oh, I thought of another. But the thing, it's so prevalent that like it's rare to find examples of otherwise. So anyway, oh yeah. So talking about I'm talking about saying your yeses are yeses and your noes are noes. When Jesus is all that matters, who cares what people think about you? Like who cares? Like when you hold on to that bold character, like you know who he is. And you know what he died for. It's just like, it doesn't matter. Like, and I'm not saying that in a passive nature. It's just like, it really doesn't matter. Because we're changed, we deny ourselves. So why would I continue to try to put up a face when there's no face to be had anymore? Like, the only face that I have is Christ living in me. Like, that's why Paul, we had this certain conversation recently in my church gatherings. Talking about Paul basically saying, it's not how you live anymore, because Christ lives in me. And that's how the way I feel in that. It's like everything I do, it's just like, I can't even describe it. So Paul really does good. He has a good way with words. So anyway. And sometimes we do say things in order not to present it out. Like, and God sees it as evil in that sense. Like when we say certain things, that comes back to the whole I swear on the temple. We often say things too to get things done. An example of this is God called me to do this. Do I believe that there are times where it's supposed to? Absolutely. But I believe it's used too many times. Like in terms of like, I have been called to do this, or this, and I hear it a lot. Or like, what's God's purpose for me? Like that type of thing. I hear that a lot too. But so it's just like, okay, no. Saying God called me to do can very well be applicable as long as it's not trying to spearhead something. If God really is trying to spearhead something, you just do it. It just happens. You cannot help. It will happen. And so it's just like, and I think that's when it's like time to sit back and look at things by their fruit. That's a good way of discerning things. It's like if someone were to say, God called us to do this, and we're going to do this, look for the fruit. And that's John the Baptist talks about. Anyway, godly courage is also fueled, paradoxically, by surrender. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. It's a very, very good thing there. Through surrender, we paradoxically become whole. The mark, and yes, I say mark intentionally, the mark of the kingdom is self-sacrifice. The mark of the beast is conformity to anything besides that which is of God. So be careful. There is also this in church too. And I mean, like, God wants us to do this. Going back to the same statement, right? God wants us to do this. I've been called to do this. Or when people cherry pick. What?
He laid it on my heart.
Or cherry picking scripture to meet their own needs. I've received issues with this years ago on many occasions. Be very careful when cherry picking scripture. Know what the context is. It's brutal. I like being on the receiving end of that as well. Like, I'm not talking about anything. Like, I'm talking about things that have happened in my family's past as well. It's huge. Anyway, through surrender, we lose the tyranny of ourselves. Self-preservation is out of fear. Think of Gethsemane. God was fearful. Jesus was fearful. And he said, if possible, let this cup pass from me. That was his one moment of an attempt at self-preservation. And then notice later on, he relinquishes it. That was his weakest moment. It's so huge that self-preservation comes out of the idea of fear, okay? The feeling of fear. So through surrender, we lose the tyranny of ourselves. Now, I'm going to take a break. I just need a 5-minute breather, okay? We're almost in the notes, kind of, but not really. I just need a breather. I really do. It's starting to get hot in here. I'll be back on the other side of this, and right, guys, I'll see you on the other side of this. Hopefully, we'll get to some discussion in here. But we're basically right in a good place. So, all right, see you on the other. All right, I just needed that breather. I did forget to mention something. This is something I did want to mention. Self-flagellation. That is a constant thing that happened in centuries past. Like Catholicism did a lot with that during the bubonic plague, particularly when people would have like that mourning state, and they would hurt themselves in order to get God's recognition, and that's also prevalent in modern Christian thought as well. And that's what I was talking about. Like, God doesn't want that. Like, God, like it's like constantly berating oneself.
Mental stuff.
Yeah, it's like the constant berating of oneself. That's not what God wants. No husband would want that for a wife to always. I always fail to meet your demands. That type of thing. It's just not God. And so I did have to make that statement because to me that constant mourning sounds to me like the flagellation process. And it's not. Yeah, that's why he says be happy. It's like if something were to happen that causes you to mourn, it's okay. Like, it's okay. You will be comforted. That type of a statement. Anyway. Hey, all right. So, talking about doing what's asked. Like, if someone tells you to do something, go that extra mile. And that's huge. So the point of it is, if someone asks you to do something, go well beyond it. That whole do more. A blessing is when we are inconvenienced. I don't mean to the state of it's weird because it's like there's a point why it's called the narrow path, right? And so we're not to search for inconvenience, but we are blessed when we are. And that's, and so and at that time, Roman soldiers would have people carry their arms. There's a reason why we have a specific amendment that talks about like the not being forced to quarter. That was just a common thing, and so we don't live in a society where that happens. And so when we do have that, like when say something is happening and you're being asked to do something that's somewhat burdensome, go that extra mile at that point. So anyway, love gives. Oh, the slapping thing, I've heard it said, and I used to think this way, that it just said when you're slapped, slapping is shaming, not punching. Okay, so like slapping is like you're being disgraced, dehumanized. Turn the other cheek. That means you're being disgraced, then so be it. Like, then let it happen. And I heard the statement before. Actually, I was raised very much on that concept of when you're slapped, and you turn the other cheek. It doesn't say do it twice. And it's like, no, it actually does. It really does. It really basically says, if you can get out of a situation, get out of it. But basically, if you're being disgraced, take it. Just take it. And because you're living with light, and people will automatically think of it like an animal. I mentioned this before to a couple of friends. Think of it like you have an animal, and you're doing something that it doesn't like in order to help it. Like think of it like an animal getting taken to the vet, and it'll snap at you sometimes, but that's sometimes necessary. And I'm not saying this. That's why it's a narrow path. I'm not saying that we should force issues, but when it comes to it always should come from a stance of love, and it always should come from a stance of giving. And giving sometimes is not in terms of finances. So it's like, say someone, for example, is using and manipulating you. Sometimes the best thing to do is to remove yourself from a situation, or sometimes just giving in that sense will hurt that person. You need to be, discernment is essential, and that's what's being presented here as well. But love doesn't just serve, it gives. He who was rich became poor for us. So why shouldn't we do the same for others, right? When we give, we trust in our King, even when it comes to our lives. But he's worth it. Loving your neighbor was a huge thing. So what does it mean to love your neighbor? There was the whole idea then at that time, that particular reference was stated as anyone that's not your enemy. And he's like, no. We are definitely to love just everyone. Do not dehumanize others. So that's what it means to love your neighbor. Seeing them and treating them like God would. God no longer condemns us. The accuser has been displaced. So why would we ever accuse another person for this reason? And that's a huge point. All right. We already talked about being perfect isn't necessarily a command. It's a promise. And we are perfected through love. There's nothing more godly than love. Not cleanliness. But this is a form of godliness. There's nothing more godly than love. Because by loving, his heart is full of love. By loving, our heart is his heart. And so that's why we join with him at that point. Communion with others, I'm not talking bread and cup. Communion with others, like fellowshipping, is a form of self-forgetfulness. We are together as one body at that point. Now, This is a weird place. Also, we shouldn't be go looking for compliments. That's very clear when it talks about it here. Like, don't be looking. If you see people that go, oh, yeah, you shouldn't be looking for compliments. But God does affirm us. For example, with me, He does me. I mean, I was just talking before we even entered the Bible study about how He's been affirming me in many different levels recently. But because think of it, everyone wants recognition. A child wants recognition from their parents. Like that's fine. There's a point that it exceeds a certain point. Once again, gray area, like that narrow path. Jesus was fine with it too. When people would recognize Him, like you're the Messiah, like all that type of stuff, He was okay with it, right? There's a point that it becomes self-serving, and that's the key to remember. Instead of serving others, it's serving you. So be careful with it. Prayer, giving, and fasting in this section of Matthew are particularly not for the world to see. It's our love that the world is to see. I'm going to repeat that. Prayer. He says, shut the door behind you. Or like in small groups or anything like that. It's not for the world to see. Giving. Like, do it without people knowing it. And fasting. Bless your faith. It's not for the world to see. But God affirms it. He Himself sees it. And He blesses you for it. That's exactly what Christ is getting at here. It's our love that the world is to see. The Lord's Prayer is made in a statement of we's and ours. So, our Father, not my Father. It's collective. The reflection of the greatest commandment. Love God and love your neighbor. The entire prayer is a form of, it is representative of how to pray in order to love God and love your neighbor. We ask God not to tempt us. Christ did. but when temptation comes, we shouldn't shirk it. It is a responsibility to handle and to rely on Him. So some tests are from Him. Some aren't, but some are. That's why we end with deliver us from evil. So say we do get tempted. So it's like deliver us from don't lead us into temptation, but if we happen to be in temptation, deliver us from the evil, like from any evil that we might do. That's why if we're tested, our hope is not to turn away, like so many have in the Old Testament. So deliverance is to death. The deliverance leads to death in one of two forms. Physically, like you die, or to yourself, your natural inclination, like you die to that. So deliverance is based on that. Huge point, we are not Buddhists. Buddhists believe in suppressing desire. In Christianity, we redirect it. So Buddhism is very close to Christianity. But Buddhism pushes the desire down. And in Christianity, it's like the desire that you have for these things should be more this way. So instead of desire, if you want affirmation, go to God for it. Don't turn to people. That's what he was talking about. You see all these things that others do, and don't be like that. When you pray, go behind. Close the door. There's a section about prayer there. And also, don't babble like Gentiles. They had this thing where they would just go and go and go and go, and it's like don't. They think their prayers are answered by repeating their words again and again. Similar, other religions, like for example, will say certain words and hold on to those words. Example is Om, like the holding of Om.
Mantra.
Yeah, mantras. The constant repetition. That's what's being gotten at here. Does not mean a repetitive prayer is bad. It just means don't use a word to focus. Don't use a word. Don't use a certain repetition to enter that meditative state in a sense. Like don't do that. A repetitive prayer is what Jews did it for centuries. God has said to do it. Like there's Christ said, when you pray, pray like this. Like that. There's that repetition there. They had the Shema that they would often do, but it's not to be. And he specifically says Gentiles because they use like a phrase to get them in a state, like just like with Om, like it enters like that ambiance, I guess you could say. And no, like in Christianity, it's like you turn toward him and be like, I know I sound like a broken record here, but that type of prayer is like you go to him and you honestly, from the heart, pray that way, not mumbling. So anyway. Oh, answer to the question, what's God's will for me? Jesus and the kingdom. That's like to live like in the kingdom. That's his will. That's his will for everyone. But the problem lies in, what does living in the kingdom actually mean? So, but that is his will. Talking about worry, where does our worry lie? Does it lie in ourselves, or does it lie in other people? So does that mean, like, are we worried about how things are going to end up for us? Because if we're hopeful, then we won't. Like, if we're talking about our worry for other people, that's a different matter. Because you want to serve them, you want to love them. So it can naturally be ourselves. Like, we naturally worry about ourselves. Christ did. But then we redirect it. Christ did. And so, like, if we get to that state of worry, we recognize it. And then it's like, I've been down this road before. Turn it. So, birds die and plants wither. They will die, and they have died, and they always will. But until whenever there's that moment. But they're not. Those things are not consumed by worry. They're not consumed by it. They can starve, but they're not like sitting there thinking where they're going to get their next meal from. They're not sitting there thinking, I need to make sure that I hold this much because in 3 days I know that there's going to be an issue and I won't be able to. Don't stockpile. Don't do anything like that. Just live and be and do. That's a huge thing. The stockpiling of things, because it's so natural to want to. It's funny that Christ uses a natural thing that birds do. They don't worry, just be like them. But yet for us, our natural inclination is to protect what's ours. And he says, turn that away. Also, don't crucify yourself between past failures and tomorrow's potential failures. That's like, don't have the one on the left and the one on the right in terms of failure. Don't consume yourself by that. Okay, Matthew 7. When we judge people, it's usually through categorizations. So, you're that type of person. Notice even here when I am, now I have made mistakes, I believe at some point, but like what I'm saying is there are isms. We could judge thoughts. We can judge the thinking processes, right? But not the people. Like that's the point of that. Like, you're that type of person, and then you categorize them, and then you totally disregard them or anything they have to say. Listen to what our point is to actually love that person. We're wrong, and Christ loves us just as much. Like by even when we're dead wrong. So it's just like when there is a thought process that's wrong, that's different than saying that person is not worthy of my love. That's not God. So anyway, there's a difference between categorizing someone and categorizing a thought, like an ism. If someone believes a certain way, we're to love them even if we disagree. And it may and we do clash, but it's how we handle clashes that speaks. And we are always to strive to do better and to be more understanding and to be more loving in how we approach. Judgment creates distance, usually in the form of this, like I'm above this way of thinking, right? Or I'm above this person because of the way they're thinking, right? We are to approach and not distance. So our point is to make the mountains low, and our self-made mountains, lower them. Always assume that you don't know the whole story and that your own sins have been more. This comes from the sermon here, and that your own sins are more grievous, and that's particularly because of the plank, the plank in the eye. Always think that what you've done is worse. The only one who's allowed to condemn here is Jesus. Condemnation. Condemnation means you will not handle someone, or you put them in a form of judgment, meaning you condemn someone and you produce some sort of punishment in that regard. That's condemnation. It could be mental punishment, physical punishment. Like if our judgment leads to punishment in some way, shape, or form when it comes to someone, that is not Christ. That is not the same as when it's best for that person to create a physical. I'm not talking about this type of distance. That type of like distance, like if it's better to just pull back and just let that person be. Like Paul talks about when he says they're living in ways that is not Christian. Just don't deal with them. That's different. But what this is like if we are condemning someone, saying, all right, now that you don't follow this way, like I'm not talking, once again, narrow path. Condemnation usually is looking at someone and said, you're damned now. You're going to be damned. That the hellfires are just eating you up right now. Or approaching someone and saying that God doesn't love you when you do this type of a mentality, no matter how masked it may be. It's sad because it's such a narrow path, and then people do it often without even knowing it. I still do. That judgment thing is really hard, and it shakes my world. So he doesn't even condemn the Pharisees. He argues with them. That's different. He argues with them. He doesn't condemn them to judgment in that sense. He said, you're just making your own bed yourselves, basically. You're doing it to yourself. And then he says, and then he dies for them too. And he says, forgive them. There's a happy middle of two extremes when it comes to like how things are determined, right? One school of thought is everything's predetermined. Or the other thing is like God manipulates things like a chess player. The truth of the matter is, no matter how you slice it, he knows. He knows. That's it. He just knows. So that's when it comes to asking, like he already knows what you're going to ask for. He already knows what you need. Like he just knows. And it'll be granted. He knows our trajectory no matter what. No matter what thought process there is, he already knows the trajectory. Genuine asking leads to these things, for these things to happen. Leads to these things to happen. So eventually Christ lost his selfish need to preserve his life and said, let your will be done. So the genuine asking here was, it leads, when you genuinely ask for things, the things will happen. So when he goes, if it's your will, let this thing pass from me. Like, I just really want this thing. And then he goes, no, don't let me get in the way. Just do. Like, let me just, that is a crazy model of how we are to be. Anyway. Confucianism has a very important statement, and I'm sure it was in Israel by that time, or Judea. Don't do unto others as you wouldn't have done to yourself. That's Confucian. Christ says, do unto others as you would do to yourself. So, the difference? It's easier to ignore than to care. So, if you don't do something to others, oh, that's okay, just ignore it. Just let it do to others if you were to see yourself in a situation, what would you do? Like that type, or what would you hope someone would do for you? That's what distinguishes Christianity.
It's active.
It's active. And we were talking about, oh yeah, our hope is to be universalist. Also, when it comes to like everyone who's never heard the word before, how can you honestly think that God is going to destroy everyone just because they didn't hit that spiritual lottery? If I believe in a God that has everlasting love, I just trust him. It's not my faith. I just trust. I just know that things will go the way that are through his love for me. I've seen how I have changed. How could I love a God that wouldn't show similar love to others? So what I'm saying is, it's not on us to really work in others in that way. God does. He does it himself. However, through our life, we are often seen as a beacon. So once again, it's paradoxical. So anyway, the rest of the New Testament, from here on, basically, focuses on, if we follow Christ, what are the dangers that lie ahead? And how do we handle them? Epistles basically talk about how to keep on the narrow path. You might want to, well, be doing this. You get back on this. This is better. That's the type of language. Sometimes it's like, do I have to beat you with a stick? But key purpose is to never let our love grow cold. Remember, God is love. When we love, our heart and his heart are one. Don't let it grow cold. Stay. Cling to the branch and let his fiery love run through our veins. Like that is like talking about the fire that just purifies. And that hot passion. Let it run through us like he did for us. Like his passion. Like his passion burned alive for us. And with that, we're done. With the first part. In Matthew 8, so we have all the stuff that's happening in the Sermon on the Mount. This is just a summary of the things that are said. By all means, please take a look at like these things yourselves. Like look in the scriptures, search. That's what we're here for. Even if it takes until next week to go over things. But the whole point here is Matthew 7 ends with the Sermon on the Mount. And then how things start to get dispersed, and then it's with 8. That thing is that you see like how Christ actually does this, and there's a lot that goes into it. And starting whenever we get done with the discussion of the first section here, the next section is really different than a lot of Christian churches think. Quick example. The next first story we talked about is of a leper. When he touches the leper, God can touch sin. Not sin, but uncleanliness. God can actually touch that. Of course, he's always been able to. He's always been able to touch it. The problem was that person would have been incinerated if he did. So what Christ does is, if you notice when he touches it, the uncleanliness flees. So it's a really interesting way of looking at it. So that's just the beginning. So from that point, he moves. His action, his words are put into action, and he shows us the way. And that's all I've got for right now. So 2 seconds later. Okay. All right. So, does anyone want to start off with anything? I don't care. I know long took notes.
A few. Then
We'll start with one of yours then, and then we'll go around. So go ahead.
Well, after that, I don't know if I want to go back to the genealogy again. I just wrote about the huge gaps in the genealogy.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not a literal
It's not. No. It's
genealogy.
symbolic.
Yeah.
It was made to be 14.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
14. I mean, obviously, if you look at the first 4 verses. Hello, where did Egypt go? Where did basically the judges go? The time of the judges, the time of the captivity in Egypt. It says Abram to Isaac, to Jacob, to Judah and his brothers. And then Judah begot, Perez, blah, 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 Ram, da, da, da. But during this time, like from Ram begot Aminadab, da, da, da. How long were the Israelites in Egypt?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then
yeah, you're right.
Israel went out, and how long was that? Like, what, 40 years running around in the wilderness? And then what about the time of the judges? Because we only have like 4 people, and then there's Boaz. So it's obviously not. It's obviously not literal.
The text is definitely winking at you.
Yes.
It's made to be 14. 3 times. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what else did you have?
Oh, the Magi.
Mm.
So like Chaldean.
Debatable.
Debatable. However, if they were Chaldean, were their calculations descended from like Daniel?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the thing is that there's definitely something. Like regardless of the fact, they used astrology.
Right.
So
because Daniel, I think it's thought that he was around and kind of inspired the king to send the Israelites back to, or the Jews back to Jerusalem. But I was just wondering if that had to do with, I mean, he was at least associated with those guys. And then, and then by the way, what's the story? We were talking the other day, what's the story, the myth, not myth, but the legend of the 3 kings that come to,
it was Horus.
Horus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were the 3 kings, and nowhere in the scripture are 3 kings.
3 gifts.
3 gifts.
Right.
The
caravan through Jerusalem into an uproar.
So the tradition surrounding that seems to be
taken from other.
Derived from.
Yeah. Right. That's cool.
Yeah, from the surrounding. It certainly wasn't scriptural, but and then the children of Abraham from stones. And what about where he said that he would take their hearts of stone and change them to hearts of flesh?
Yes, there's so much to be.
Yeah, and I was just like, and I have an observation.
Remember when I said there's a lot of stuff that could go into that statement right there?
And then after that, it was flying by me so fast, I just didn't take notes anymore.
Okay.
I figured I'd talk about it when we got there, but
Anyone else have anything they wanted to talk about regarding anything that we heard from Matthew 1-7?
I guess I could throw something in here. When you were talking about the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, blessed are, I never took that, and I don't know if I'm just ignorant or what, but as commandment is what you should be.
I've definitely encountered that on many occasions. Many.
Because to me, that's talking about a person's state of mind and where they are and how, don't worry about, things like blessed are those who are spiritually needy. The translation I'm looking at right now, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. And that's a good thing to be spiritually needy, because you're going to be seeking. I think of it that way. It's not saying that thou shalt do that. It's saying these people are blessed or in a good position. Yeah, so that's one of those things that I don't know why I never came across what you came across there about it being a commandment. I thought it was more like this is how you should react in life, or how your attitude should be in life as a Christian.
Exactly.
Not a commandment. But
Can I add something there?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm kind of wondering at this point, and I don't know that I ever really thought of this before, but I'm thinking, how so often when things happen to somebody, they're like, oh, what did you do that God's allowing this to happen to you? And in many of these cases, with people who are mourning, or they're thirsting for righteousness, or they're blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted. And it's like, don't think that God's abandoned you because you've done something. I mean, in many of these cases, not all. I mean, like, blessed are the merciful, of course, because they'll obtain mercy. But the ones who are suffering, because in 11 he says, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. And I think in many ways, and I think especially in the Jewish tradition, with the Pharisees.
Yep.
Yeah.
They said that person had a sin of...
Yeah, they asked him, what sin did he commit, or did his parents commit that he was born blind? And Jesus said he didn't, or they didn't. And so I'm wondering if in some ways, some of these things he's saying or telling them, you didn't do anything wrong necessarily. This is you're blessed.
Life happened, and you're dealing with the situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because Pharisees by that point had already twisted Scripture to meet their own needs. And it was seen that anyone with a disease was someone that was either, if they hadn't done sin themselves, was a descendant of someone who had. And
that's I don't know that that's really true, Joel, because if you look at the Torah, it talks about things like that, about getting cursed for doing things that were wrong and stuff like that. They might have taken it to the nth degree, but God told them that, blessings and cursings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
could see where it started, is what I'm saying, and it just mushroomed from there. As people tend to. Yeah.
I think the thing about what Christ did was, whenever he was put in the final act of Matthew, when he is like going tete-a-tete with the Pharisees.
Woe unto you. Yeah.
Yeah. But what they usually tried to trick him, or they used like varying opinions, and he said neither.
Yeah.
Just Joshua, like when it says, are you for us or against us? Neither. So it's like, how about a man that does this? And he goes, well, like you totally, have you ever read your scriptures before?
Yeah, and I love it too. When you ask him a question, he doesn't usually answer it. A lot of times they'll ask him something, and then he'll talk about whatever he was. Yeah, well, it seems like another subject, but I think it's related. But it's like he doesn't get dictated what he's going to say based on their questions necessarily. Interesting. I like that style.
You like that what?
I like the style. If you think about it, just because somebody asks you something doesn't mean you have to answer it. Answer not a fool according to his folly kind of thing is what I think he was doing. Sometimes, depending on circumstances. And then other times he answered him according to his folly.
Yeah. I was just talking to a non-Christian, was it like Saturday or Sunday? And she and I had about an hour-long conversation about just Christian stuff, right? And she goes, yeah, I really don't, like, I can't stand being in church. I hate it. She goes, but when I read the Bible, like, Jesus was the man. Like, quite literally. But anyway, but Jesus was the man. And she would be like,
he would be up in people's faces and then would like do like this here and say and like say things that really got up in people's faces. Like, all right, peace out. He was like, go somewhere else. I really liked that interpretation of it because that's pretty much what he did. That's very much what he did.
Yeah.
He would help people. People would be like, "Why are you doing that?" And he goes, "Because I can." And then he just goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can.
It's one of those deals where, hey, out in the flesh, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. How are you going to stop me until I let you? When you think about it, I like the way Mackie talks about that. He says he's walking around and owns the place.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff talking about every place the sole of your foot treads. I mean, that's basically what Christ did. Was he everywhere he went? It was just like sin flew from his presence, fled until it just piled on him. But the thing is that all uncleanliness, and it's so funny because the uncleanliness was drawn toward him and then it was washed away. But anyway, but you're right. Like he did walk around like he owned the place, very much so. Like he ruled and subdued, and that's the crux of it. Did you have any more, Dan? Like in terms of notes?
The other thing that I had was only a couple of things here. You were about hypocrites at one point. And just the way I was looking at what you were saying was a little bit similar to the other ones about the blessedness and stuff. But it's basically, that's human nature to be a hypocrite. We're all hypocrites that way. We shouldn't take salt and we can't do anything about it. We should do everything we can not to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
I've heard that said so many times that we're all hypocrites. And I'm like,
yeah, but that's like saying we're all liars, right? We're all liars too, and thieves and everything else.
That's why Christ says, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no."
Yeah, it makes it easier. No, it's just
that's another concept as well. Living in the kingdom is also a very simple path. It's simple. It's narrow.
Yeah.
It's simple.
The Amish.
It's not easy. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I have a thought here too. Like you and I were talking today, Dad. That
oh, you call him Dad, like the father? Wow.
Leave Mom alone.
Darling.
Is that our relationship with God today?
That people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that love is a lot like that. People observe and feel and emote, and they don't care what you have to say if you're not following through. I mean, if you're not, if they don't see it. Yeah. And I was just looking here about you're the salt of the earth and you're the lights of the world, and there's not a lot of sound there.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to ask you about that.
There's not a lot of sound in salt, and there's not a lot of sound in salt is an experience. It's not a sound, and light is an experience. It's not a sound.
Yeah. I don't remember it saying anything about bullhorns or anything, right?
Overeating going on there.
Or trumpets. Oh, wait, it does say about trumpets. Don't blow them when you walk into them.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. Let me find it. Go ahead, guys. I'm just looking for something particular.
I was just kibitzing, Joe.
Oh, there we go. That's a huge thing. Go ahead.
Okay.
We're talking about prayer. We're talking about the Gentiles praying. I forgot to mention this. Sorry. Mm-hmm. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. Mm-hmm. I tell you the truth. That is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. And your Father who sees everything will reward you. I feel personally and I'm still battling with this. I feel as if like in a church setting, it's expected to pray. Like when you are like in a group, like a prayer meeting, you pray. You do that. That's what they did in Acts. They gathered in a group, right? And then, but the thing is though, but it was purposefully stated. Paul says that when you start talking like in tongues and stuff like that, like don't do it in your atrium. Like people think you're not exactly. And so the thing is though, what Christ is saying here is like don't go out with big declarations. And like don't go out who love to play publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. And it's like it's all for show. And I have
I think there's also something said when it's all for show like that. Even if people, I think sometimes people are misled and think that that's a good thing to do, that you go out and have people see you pray. But the ordinance is against it.
And it's done with the fullest of intentions too.
Yeah, but the point is that kind of thing I think offends people, and there are all kinds of things about not offending people, and turning them against. I mean, because that naturally happens to begin with. It's because one thing about being salt is if you've ever got salt in a wound, it purifies
and it burns.
But it burns, and it burns as it's purifying. And just so people will see us and really be aggravated by it, but we're not supposed to invite the aggravation.
Right. You don't need too much salt. You need a little bit of salt.
I'll say that. But one thing that has been really aggravating me in modern context are where these groups of like thousands of people come together publicly to fall before God. When it happened in Israel, there was a point to that. Because Israel was God's chosen. They were his portion, right? And so they collectively did that before him. When it comes to Christianity, though, it's like the biggest thing is not to cause offense. And it's just like, I heard a lot of negative things from non-Christians when it came to gigantic prayer gatherings recently. I'm talking about the gigantic one. And it's just, or like the massive things that you see happening on television. It's like, and I'm sitting here looking at scripture, and it's like, can it not be clearer when it says don't do that? And the apostles afterward didn't do it either. They prayed in small groups, so it wasn't like the show. And I feel.
Well, prayer. The thing is, prayer is good, but not. You shouldn't be doing it as a demonstration in public. It should be done behind closed doors, and then whatever you're praying about, maybe you ought to go out and put a little bit of action to it, and do something about it. Yeah,
right.
It's just not. It's say prayer. I'm gonna rub the genie's lamp and make it happen here.
There's a point
God expects us to be partnerships, whatever's happened. We're not sitting there to be bystanders.
So, did Christ sit there and pray, like, Father, help, like, so-and-so an individual? It's like, no, he went there, and he helped that person. Now, he didn't help.
Well,
okay. Let me think
Jesus, I think, is a little bit different here because he could show up and have somebody. We can't.
I disagree. I absolutely disagree. And I will say why. Going back to that whole concept of moving mountains and stuff like that, when you are so in unity with him, I absolutely think now. I used to absolutely be against this, and it's so crazy that I've done a complete 180. I repented from that thought.
Turned.
It was a point. It's like the apostles healed. Like, and I'm not saying making it for show, but when it comes right down to it, the Spirit grabs you, and there it goes. Like,
but Joel, I'm not saying that that I do believe in prayer and healing and that thing, but I'm not Jesus and can go in there and just do it myself. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
No.
You can go and visit sick and pray with them, and hope for those kind of things. But you're not. Go ahead.
I'm gonna disagree. Let me explain why. Yes, absolutely. Go there. Clear with that. That's exactly what we are to do. Christ chose to heal a lot of people, right? And a lot of multitudes are drawn to him, right? We are also given the same power that he has. We are granted it. The problem lies with us. We are the ones that prevent that from happening. And I honestly think that when you are in such unity with him, that's why he said, ask and it will be granted. Because by that point, you're in union. And by that point, there's nothing. It's not for your own selfish needs. Because a lot of what happens is if you pray, if you do something, it's almost like a magic trick. And then it's like, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. That's where we lose it. I honestly believe that it can be done, and that it is done. It's just, have I had it happen in my life? Kind of. Not exactly in the healing process of things, but definitely in in terms of everything happens exactly the way I asked it to happen. And sometimes it's not even that I asked it to happen. Mom was talking about this recently. It just happens the way I tell it to happen. And it's a weird, but it's not like I'm really,
Not like testing God.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like you're going here, let me see if this trick will work.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm so filled with his love. He fills me with his love, but I don't make a show of it. It just happens. And then when it happens, I'm super grateful. And it's crazy. And it's absolutely crazy. Yeah.
And that Paul talked about, listen, is healing one of the gifts that Paul talks about? I'm not sure. That everybody has gifts.
Right.
And not everybody has the same gift.
Exactly. I absolutely can go with that. Christ is the head. Christ is the head, right? And so the rest of everyone has their own function. I totally get that, but I do believe that there are the healing process of things. I believe that when it gets down to the crux of things, that even though you might say one part of the body is meant for one certain thing, but there are times where it might have to fill in for another.
So every once in a while, you got to pick up a piece of paper or a pen with your right?
Mouth.
I don't think I should mouth on my finger.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like usually you grab a pen with your fingers. Maybe there's that one time where the toes just have to reach each other, right?
Yeah. Well, it's just at the underneath the couch. I'm trying to reach.
Anyway, but I think that's something that has hindered a lot of Christianity. And the reason I disagreed with you so fervently was, think of it this way. Just think of it this way. Did God really say that? Did God really say that you would do greater things than these? And I think that's a huge thing right there. You have to be like, okay, he told me this. He meant it. So it's just like, if I just trust, if I just know, if I just love, it happens. Really? 2 years ago.
The argument is, though, that he said that to the apostles or the disciples.
Well, the thing is, though, I think part of that is the fact God's Spirit is now with us, within people, and God's work can be worked through people all over the place, and Christ could have a bigger magnitude of impact on the world through all his people who are endowed with his Spirit. Yeah, and whether or not that's a healing thing or just a spiritual thing or connecting with people or comforting those that are mourning, whatever. Talk about great, the great impact, the large impact it could be if we all just followed that.
Yeah.
That's the way I understand that. It's not just individual; it's all of us.
No, it's collective. You're right. A lot of it's collective. That's why it's our Father in heaven. Like your name always be. Yep.
Right. But we all have our part to play at the same time.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, by the way, too, my eye just fell on chapter 7, verse 21. Back to showing love. And not a lot said, because he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, not everyone who says will enter the kingdom, but he who does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, I did this. I did this for you. It's like, look at what I did. I piously did all these things. I piously did, like, I prayed so much. I did this or whatever, and it's just like, I don't know you.
Kind of like the sheep and the goat.
No. Yeah, but you can run around saying, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, but unless you're actually doing it.
Yeah, but fast forward to the end of Matthew where it talks about the sheep and the goats in front of the judgment seat. When did I ever do this, and when did I ever do that for you?
Right.
Versus the opposite.
Like when you bent down and helped someone else, that was me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, James talks about that too, saying to people, oh, this, and this, but if you don't do it, if you don't actually follow up on it, no.
Then it becomes Ecclesiastes vapor.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you're right. Yeah, it's meaningless. You're searching for self-serving needs. And, because you're for self-serving, you do all this stuff in order to earn rank. It's the common Gentile way of doing it.
Yeah.
But
in other people's eyes.
I won't forget this. Sorry, what?
You do all these things and do acting and stuff in order to impress people and move up this little ladder or whatever. Yeah.
That's where the Pharisees were at. And that's like when you think.
And that's human nature. That's human nature,
right.
though.
Look at churches today. They're like, look at all these things we're doing. Look at these, and it's like that's so not God. Anyway, I do have to say this as well. Is when talking about not every when he says what was the thing when he said when you help the least of these, you were doing this to me.
Right.
Remember. We are made in his likeness. That's what he means.
Right. Yeah.
So when you
it does say though, when you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, he says, especially. It says, my brethren.
Be careful. Be careful, because you're entering the same realm as the neighbor dispute. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No. What I'm saying, but that specifically was the quote is to the least of these, my brothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, but it's not that you shouldn't do it for your enemy too. I'm not saying that.
I wonder if we're pulling that out of context, because if we go back to Judea, they were brethren. They were, and the Pharisees had a caste system. And everybody, some were great and some were not.
Yeah, it was honor and shame.
Yeah, the least of these, my brethren, are of the people, basically, I think.
Oh, okay. In Israel, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, so that might be a contextual.
Yeah, it could very well, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I wasn't thinking of it that way. It sounded like it was within the, the Christian family.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is, he was basically saying in any given caste system, where men have made, made.
Yeah, that's good, because when he talks about but when you talk about the Christian church, are you talking about the caste system and the least of these, my brethren? Yeah, you might be right. That, if I can reread that.
Because their society was very much based on a social rank. We don't have that, and we kind of do, but it's more like
we shouldn't have it. We shouldn't have it. Right. In fact,
it was there.
You look at the rest of the Gospels. Jesus was pretty much against it. Having all their phylacteries out, or however you say it, and do this.
Yeah, another contextual thing too is when he was talking to these people, nobody was Christian. They were Jews.
They were just starting.
Yeah.
Yes, the Spirit had not yet descended, but he was already paving the way and things.
But then he was dealing with his covenant people. And there was just in the church, I guess, there was some that were more on the ball than others.
Yeah, they were the covenant people, but they weren't the church followers. Yeah, the church.
You're right. And it wasn't until Antioch. You're right there. It's still, though, it's just like, but they were Christians. They were following.
Oh, yeah, they were following him. Yeah.
And so he's basically saying, "This is how you follow me." And the other thing too, and I forget.
Also, too, when they came to the house and told him, your mother and brothers are standing outside and want to talk to you.
These are my mother and brothers.
And he said, guess who is my mother and my brothers and my sisters, my brethren?
In my opinion, that also means neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, in my opinion, it means like everyone.
No, when he said, you are my brothers and sisters. Yeah, he didn't, everybody was his brethren at that point.
Yeah, once again, the mountains were made low. But I have to mention this. In that culture, the primary, so similar to the gods. Like, so when you prayed to a god, you prayed in order to earn its favor, right? Now, the same thing happened in society. So if someone was below you on the social rank, it wasn't you that was to look at them and bring them up to your level. They had to earn your favor. And then they would potentially, based on your decision, have access to a higher level. And it's very, so it goes all the way up the chain, even to the gods.
Patronage.
Exactly. And so you had and that's what Christ is basically saying, no, none of that. And so like he made it absolutely equal. That was something that was very much unforeseen. No other culture was doing that. And even the United States today and a lot of Western society now is based on the concept of everyone having certain rights, and that is like not like how things used to be.
But it still isn't. Even in the United States, it isn't.
It's a lot closer than it used to be.
Oh no, it is. There's a lot of internal. What is that term? Society things aren't really by law.
Right.
Right, or custom. It's more. You want to be in the tree club? You have to be invited.
Yeah, so it's like, but it wasn't to that extent. It was so much. Yeah, I can't even that's why I have to say you cannot describe it. You have to just study how that culture was and see that it was rigid. It's like the caste system. It was, but even the caste system in India today is a lot weaker than it used to be. And so anyway, I also okay. Did anybody else so Ted, did you have more comments?
Oh, I'm just looking fast when I talk to him. Keep going.
Okay. I did not know if Linda had any comments or was just listening. So I'll just see.
Hi. I was pretty much just listening. It's getting pretty late, so I didn't have much.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions, but I'll ask them later.
Okay, cool. Maybe, and then if you want to, when we see each other, you can have those questions prepared. And then, because I know that you said next week there might be an issue, so I can bring those questions up next week as well. So, yep.
Oh, okay. Or, yeah.
Yes. Yes?
It's interesting. Yeah. I'm looking at Matthew 25, verse 41. Or actually, it's 39. And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say unto you, to the extent that you did it to one of the least of these brothers mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. And then underneath there, in verse 46, no wait, not 46, there was another place.
I'll tell you the truth, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me.
Yeah, okay, it does say brothers and sisters or siblings or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so, yeah, how do you, now this was a thing towards the end, and was this being for us, Christians, New Testament covenant, or has this been directed to the Old Covenant?
I would
probably going to be a debate on that. Yeah, I think both too. It would seem to apply.
I think
anyway, I was just looking.
One thing about God's unchanging nature, and I think this is a good way to end it. One thing about God's unchanging nature, is He immutable? Yes, but not in the way that, and it's stated as such, but not in the way as modern Christianity views it, and Judaism today. It didn't used to view it this way. The current concept is that He's immutable, like in a sense that He doesn't waver, and He doesn't have. It's like, be careful though, because I'm not saying the same thing as putting emotions into like the Greek gods, like because Greek gods were just like really like they bickered and they fought and they it was just, and then they would love each other and then they would cheat on one another and all that stuff. It's like very. We are meeting gods like this, though. So the thing is, though, He is immutable, though. He is immutable. He's not this stagnant other. Remember, we talked about the otherliness, the otherness. He is immutable, but that also, as such, we should also be immutable. That is the point of everything here. Let your yeses be yes and your no's be no. When you are immutable in nature, that means, are you developing? Yes, or you're learning to, but when we are with Him, like when we are truly aligned with Him, we are immutable.
And not following every wind of doctrine.
Yes, but thinkers, but not following every wind of doctrine, right, but to be immutable. Meaning, think of it this way. A lot of people say, yeah, there was the tongues at that point, but tongues can't be today. I'm going in the face of a lot of theologies right now, so don't worry about it, okay? It meant what it was meant for them, but it wasn't meant for later. And it goes, and what Paul said only meant that in this certain context, and I fall short of that too because I still have problems debating that. No, the purpose is this. When you're a Christian, you're Christian. It happens. Like God, you can't limit God's ability in terms of like, we are immutable in the sense that these truths do apply to us. Us bending down to help others. Us casting our crowns before the throne. How do we cast our crowns before the throne? By serving others. By following His example. No longer are we seeking the prestige. We are seeking others' prestige. We are willing to go as far as being crucified with the worst of the worst, and that's the crux of it. And that's why it's just like, yeah, that's His immutability is. If you look at Scripture, He is immutable in that. He is unfailing in love. It never is quenched. And that's how we are supposed to be. That's the crux of what it means to be a Christian. So, anyway, that's it. Good? Any final comments?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Well, we will go ahead and pray this one out. It was terrible. Worst. Father in heaven, may your name forever be holy. May your kingdom come. And may your will be done here as it is in heaven. May we continue to be nourished with every day. Should that be your will. And forgive us for anything that we might have done that we do need to know about. And may we also forgive those who do things against us because they don't know what they are doing. We hope that we may never be put into temptation. But if that were to happen, deliver us from evil. May we forever be like you. Thank you for showing us the way. Amen.
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 So, we time for a quick.
Bye, guys.